think for this episode, we're gonna focus on the event, right? At least on, you know, just kind of some basic issues, right? We're gonna try to. I don't know that we can definitively answer two questions, but there are two main questions I think that are critical, right? And I think the first question is, you know, how many shots were fired, right? And then the second critical question would be, you know, how many shooters, right? And they're kind of related. And we're kind of dig into those details, use the Warren Commission report both as a reference point, but also kind of as a way of organizing things, and then some, you know, alternative pieces of information, and kind of take it from there. All right, so me and Josh here, we're gonna start talking about or looking into something that we've had an argument about for years, and a lot of it had to do with our first trip together to the 6th floor museum in downtown Dallas, where, you know, they have a lot of the relics, and, you know, it was actually, I don't think it's called the School Book Depository anymore. It's got a different name, but it is the School Book Depository. It's on the 6th floor where all of the Lee Harvey Oswald things took place, right? So it has like the perch and where he supposedly shot, has a lot of the relics from the assassination of JFK. So when we first went there together, the thing that encapsulates and really links the argument that we have was that there was some, I just remember very vividly, there's like this guy, you know, in his 50s or 60s, kind of looks rough, wearing like khakis and like, you know, the white New Balance. And this guy, instead of having a laptop, he's got like a cart with a car battery connected to a desktop somehow. And I remember pointing that guy out, and I'm like, Josh, these are the conspiracy theorist people. These are the guys that like the conspiracy theory. These guys are all wackos, you know, and I can't believe you're taking that guy's side. And Josh was like, you know what? I think he's making a little bit of sense. And I just couldn't believe it. How would you summarize your kind of perspective on, you know, developing your own theory as to what happened?
I started to shake my opinion was mainly off of a lot of the account witnesses that were there, and a lot of the stuff that I've seen that interviewed people that were on, like, you know, like at Dealey Plaza when it happened. And it was just like a lot of people were saying the same things. I saw like the videos and pictures of like the group of people that ran up the hill because like they were trying to chase the person down that they thought that they saw. So it was just like, it was just weird to see all this information and then for it not to actually be investigated was kind of weird, or for it not to be validated, which was really weird.
Mm-hmm.
My opinions stay the same as far as like overall what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, cause I got to the point where like, I don't think cause I was trying to figure out like who actually did it, right? If maybe if you're saying there's multiple people, then if we know Oswald was probably one, then who was the other one? I was so consumed of actually trying to figure out who that person could be. And then it got to the point where like, well, let me take a step back. Like if someone were to be part of a conspiracy, right? It now became a question who could get away with it or orchestrate it, right?
Right.
And then it became, why would they do that? So it was like, then I started to look in that perspective because I was like, at this point,
Right.
if there was another shooter, we're never going to know who that person is at this point, right?
And unless you're a viewer and you know that person,
that'd be great. Please
know, right?
leave a comment. Yes.
Yeah, let us know. I like my own flavor of Occam's razor, right? Like it's sort of like to me, the simplest, the dumbest, the laziest explanation from a human perspective is probably the right answer, right? And people like for things to be complex and have deeper meaning. And sometimes it's just, sometimes something big happened because of coincidence. Sometimes something big happened because someone got lucky, right? It doesn't always have to be that the best, the most organized person, you know, through careful planning achieves something, right? Sometimes someone can just get lucky. So that's what was my thinking, was like, people just didn't want to admit that major things could just be stopped by some loser, right? So
Right.
people want for it to be bigger. And for me, um, I just always thought, well, you know what? Maybe he got lucky, right? It's not impossible to shoot 3 times, right? Like things like that. But then just the details of the assassination are just, you know, every bit of detail you get, it's just like surprising that you didn't really know that level of detail, right? Because the simple story is just um unsatisfactory once you get into like the details, right? I mean, as we discuss this, I want to emphasize facts, or at least things that we're going to take as fact, and then distinguish that from things where they're theories or we're filling in the blanks, because there's lots of missing puzzle pieces, so to speak, right?
Okay, Eric and I are now going to get into how many shots were there. We're going to look into the war report and other findings and discuss the details.
1. President Kennedy was first struck by a bullet which entered at the back of his neck and exited through the lower front portion of his neck, causing a wound which would not necessarily have been lethal. The president was struck a second time by a bullet which entered the right rear portion of his head, causing a massive and fatal wound. 2. Governor Connally was struck by a bullet which entered on the right side of his back and traveled downward through the right side of his chest, exiting below his right nipple. This bullet then passed through his right wrist and entered his left thigh, where it caused a superficial wound. F. There is no credible evidence that the shots were fired from the triple underpass, ahead of the motorcade, or from any other location. The weight of the evidence indicates that there were 3 shots fired.
What's your initial thinking as to, okay, this is the problem I have with that conclusion?
It just seems like 3 shots is kind of low. Based off of like when you hear people's testimony or like their initial interviews after the event, you kind of get a sense that 3 seems kind of like on the low number. I know 3 is what is represented in the report or what they feel strongly of.
Yeah.
But there are parts of the Warren report where they do basically admit that there were some people that heard like upwards to 6 shots, right? And it's just in the conclusion, it doesn't say the specific times, but I know we're going to go in other parts of the report that gets a little bit more in specifics. But if you're just asking like, okay, well, what are my concerns is that can he really get off 3 shots in that amount of time to be accurate about it? Would be my initial concern.
Okay, that's interesting, because I mean, I don't think this is like a groundbreaking theory, but I'm on the same page with you. Like, I think that just the number of shots, right? Because so much attention is paid to identifying the number as kind of like the starting point for the analysis, right? They're like, there were 3, right? That does a lot of things, right? And that's my concern, right? Is like they're very specific on 3, and I guess 3 is a convenient number, right? Because there were 3 shell casings found in the school book depository, right, on the 6th floor. So it's corroborated by that, right? Then I think in later parts or in specific parts of the report, we'll probably have to really get deep into just the number issue. But I think just the number of shots, I think from a high level is kind of like one of the first things that stands out as, okay, maybe there is something more here. Maybe there is something left out of this report, because the I don't want to say swiftness. Well, I'm saying swiftness, but I mean, it just seems very conclusory, right? They go immediately to 3, right? There's no explanation of 4, right? There's some explanation of potentially 2, but never. They very careful, and like we just heard, right? No other shots from no other places could have happened, right? It's like, okay, we want to minimize, focus in on one person, right? And that's kind of the part that stands out, I think, to me.
So what are your feelings about, I guess, what's represented through the report in terms of the timing?
Here's the thing, right? Time span of shots, and this is what we're talking about. Like, okay, what are the facts, right? What's fact, right? And knowing what we know now about the Zapruder film, right? And it's video, so they can pretty well do timing, right? Because you can just go frame by frame. Each frame is an increment of time, so you can time things relative to each other that happen in the film, right? So to me, the fact that they're saying the two shots that hit Kennedy, right? The neck shot and the skull shot were between 4.8 and 5.6 seconds apart, right? That's fact. You can't really manipulate that, right? But we're just going to say, okay, we'll assume it's between 4.8 to 5.6 seconds between the two shots that they saw, right? They're trying to establish that amount of time that the three shots were fired could be done by Oswald, right? So they set up this test with 3 sharpshooters. Don't know why they picked 3, right? And they set up targets at distances that generally correspond to the 3 shots that they thought, right? And they're all rated as master marksmen by the NRA, right? And they all had the same gun, right? And they timed them. And the timing that they were able to fire on the target was 4.6, 6.75, 8.25, right? 5.15, 6.45, and 7 seconds, right? It's interesting that this is basically the minimum amount of time that you can fire consecutive shots, right?
Was it 4.6?
4.6 was the lowest of any of them, right? And then, I did the numbers. So like the average amount of time it took was 6.4 seconds. And you go back to our fact here. The 2 shots were 4.8 to 5.6 seconds apart. So that means that basically it means that any theory, right, that requires 2 shots to be shot by the same person to hit Kennedy, it doesn't, it's not corroborated by their evidence, right? Their evidence actually shows the opposite. Of the 6 chances with 3 marksmen, only 1 time was someone able to do it fast enough, right?
But I think why it's 3 or less is that it just sells the idea that it was just one person. Because once you start confirming that it could be 4 or more, then you're almost immediately saying that it was multiple, or at least 2 people, right?
Yeah, I think 4 is too many for one person, for sure. And I think 3 is too many. I want to say 3 is too many for the scenarios that they're laying out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You just couldn't do it fast enough, Very few people could do it fast enough based on this. And the assumption being like, they're using good shooters, right? Ideal conditions, kind of like a test.
And
right?
the funny part is that based off the study, it went opposite of what they said really happened. Because it's like they were successful with their first shot, missed the second, and then hit the third shot. And then they're saying he missed the first shot, landed the second and the third.
Yeah.
Which is like,
yeah, you have to hit them consecutively for the timing to work.
Right.
Because you don't have enough time to miss a shot in between the 2 that are shown as hitting the president, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to do them back to back, and the person doing it back to back has to be really fast relative to this test that they ran.
Right. Now let's get into how many shooters were there. Eric is going to start reading on page 71 of the Warren Report.
So here's what they say exactly. In contrast to testimony of the witnesses who heard and observed shots fired from the depository, the commission's investigation has disclosed no credible evidence that any shots were fired from anywhere else. So we've already established that, potentially there are issues with the official report when it comes to number of shots. And that's something that's probably going to be a common theme as we progress through this series of videos that we make on this. And then kind of the other question, at least at the outset, like questions about the actual assassination itself. And the key question is, okay, how many shooters? We know that the official story, the official Warren Report conclusion is one shooter. Do you have any problems with that based on what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, and to kind of go back to what we were talking about before, is the main problem I have with it is just from the eyewitnesses that were there at the ground level at Dealey Plaza at the time of the shootings. A lot of them heard multiple shots, probably around the 5-shot range, and then a lot of them also pointed towards the grassy knoll where the picket fence was. That's my biggest thing.
Yeah. So you're thinking what? Someone was at the grassy knoll, and that was kind of like it's kind of the oldest, for my age group, that's kind of like the oldest theory, right? I mean, it's even like a joke in Seinfeld about like the grassy knoll, right? Picket fence. But yeah, I mean, I'm in the same place where I think, like, having gone to the 6th floor museum down there, kind of walking the grounds at Dealey Plaza, you see a lot of things that kind of tie together that, maybe something did happen there, because there are lots of eyewitness kind of reports on that. And that's something that we're going to try to undertake in, future episodes. There were railroad workers on the overpass, which has a direct line of sight to where the motorcade was. And those were the witnesses that said that they heard something coming from that area. And to say that there's no credible evidence, I think is a significant step too far, really. I don't know. That to me is like the biggest issue. And I think a lot of it has to do too with kind of the timing of everything, right? Because you have eyewitnesses that were close, and what they say is corroborated by the Zapruder film, right? Like, there's photographic evidence of what they said that they didn't have access to. So it's almost like it verified it. And the commission had access to everything, yet they classified it as not being credible. To me, that's kind of like the point where I kind of switched my perspective.
Yeah, so for me, it wasn't just the people at the top of the train bridge. There were many different witnesses that were on the ground level of Dealey Plaza. A few that come to mind, there was Billy Newman and his family. They felt that they heard shots that came from the grassy knoll. There was also Charles Brim, who has military experience. He felt that the shots came from the grassy knoll as well, and there were so many other people there that heard many different shots outside of just the three. If you account for all the people that heard or possibly saw the shots from the grassy knoll, where I get confused is that what makes them less credible than the people that saw the shooter from the 6th floor at the school book depository. So it's just like one's credible and the other one's not.
Those are not contradictory things, right? Like
Right.
if one person saw somebody shooting from a building, doesn't mean that somebody else didn't see somebody shooting from a different spot, right?
Well, I guess my point is like what makes one more credible than the other, right? Because it's
Yeah,
pretty much
no,
the
I
same
mean that kind
scenario.
of cuts to the heart of everything, right? It's like, wait a minute, if you're saying this isn't credible and it's not, I mean they do touch on it, but it's not worth investigating, then it raises serious issues with not the credibility of the witnesses, but credibility of the findings and the conclusions. And then I guess another person that should be mentioned is Governor Connolly, who was shot himself. The commission report has lots of instances where what he's saying happened doesn't really fit with what they want him to say happened, and I find it um, very problematic for them that one of the people that was actually in the car was actually shot. They try to really manipulate the timing and the sequence of what he says happened, and it's funny how they, discredit him here and there, saying, well, sometimes when you're shot, you don't realize that you've been shot for some period of time. Um, again, lack of credible witnesses who don't see what, fits exactly with the sequence and the details of the events that are laid out in the conclusions of the report. So this is just kind of our introductory episode. I think, we're borrowing a lot from the Warren Commission report. I think it's a good resource, a good framework to talk about this. So obviously, it all starts with the event. And we kind of pointed out some of the major issues, but our plan is we're going to put together kind of a series of videos where we're going to basically just march through the Warren report. We'll probably mix and match different sections, but we'll follow loosely the chapters and kind of dig into the details of the things that are important to us. I guess the other thing we want to do is build a community or be more interactive, right? If you watch this and you think there's something that should be investigated, or if there are parts of the report in particular that you have issue with, I'm hoping, very hopeful, that we have a lively comment section where people kind of throw out theories and point out their own ideas as to what's important, what's been left out, and we'll kind of work our way through the report. If there's something that I guess speaks to us, we'll probably dig into the comments and make a video devoted to some of the specific things brought up in the comment section.